right, 7:03. So we should get going. And I think Jane will be on shortly. So good to see everybody. This is the Sherborn Advisory Committee meeting for March 8th, 2023. As per usual, we're doing this on Zoom, given the appropriate state authorities that let us do that for a public meeting, and meeting was duly posted and all, as was as per requirements. So I'll start by reading the agenda, and then we'll get going. So we'll, as per usual, start with liaison reports. I've got a couple things, perhaps others do as well, and then we're going to talk about debt and the debt budget and related issues. That was not on the first posted agenda. It's on the revised agenda that was posted, in sufficient time that we're good in having that on without needing to take a special vote to include that. And then we'll get going on warrant article discussions for annual town meeting. And we'll be doing articles 17 through 23, go through them in order unless somebody who's presenting has a particular time constraint or strong preference to switch the order. Let me know if you do. Otherwise, we'll go in the we'll just go through them in the order, in numerical order. We'll approve minutes, and that should be the meeting. And at the end, we can talk a little bit about plans for the public hearing as kind of a setup for our next official meeting. Anybody have any changes or additions to the agenda to propose? If not, I would happily entertain a motion to approve the agenda as read.
So moved.
Thank you. Second?
Second.
Thanks. All right, quick roll call. Jane? Peter?
Aye.
Mike?
Aye.
Nora?
Aye.
Natalie? Steve?
Aye.
And I'm aye as well. So that gets us, let's see, what are our numbers now? 1, 2, 3, 4. So 8. Okay, 8-0. Good. All right. The one other thing I need to do, the ever painful asking for. Oh, Wasim, I missed you there, Wasim. My apologies. Are you
no
good?
worries? Aye.
Good. Okay. Thank you. Sorry about that. All right. I need to one more time ask for a volunteer to take minutes, if somebody would be willing to do that tonight.
I can do it.
Okay, thank you, Steve. I was going to say I'm going to have to do my hard classroom stare to get people to get somebody to speak up and get going. Okay. Perfect. So anybody with any liaison reports to bring in and share with advisory? Peter, anything you wanted to say, or Nora, about capital budget?
Yeah, I'll add that the school committee, and this may be duplicative of previous announcements, had reduced the regional ask, and I'm going to the budget book here, by eliminating or not requesting the town's capital items for 3 of the 4 regional requests. And those include equipment, which was vague to be determined, that related to upgraded of wastewater treatment, so they don't need funds for that or have other means to finance that. Flooring fixtures for bathrooms in the Lindquist Common and floor tiles. They no longer need those funds. That was $60,000. The equipment was $25,000. Nor the classroom floors for $125,000, replacing hallways and classroom floors in the math wing, and so that was not required. So we took those off, and then for the air handlers, the rooftop air handlers for 7 units, That went from 1.1 million to 1.2 million. So their ask from 1.305 million to 1.2 million was approved last night, with Sherborn's share at 46.05%, or approximately 552,600, was approved by the Capital Budget Committee. And that was it. Everything else was approved. We also revisited DPW, public buildings, the roads, and stormwater, for which we had mentioned in other minutes. So that's the update. And Nora, if I missed anything, or you can correct me or add value.
Sounds good to me. You're very valuable, and valuable is all good.
And
So Peter, you said that you revisited the DPW town buildings capital, but no alterations were made in that request or capital budget's recommendation, right?
Correct.
Okay.
It was a formality last night to vote within the time frame of the meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Dan, don't set an end date to any of your meetings.
yes, I caught that lesson. So on the town building requests, the total specific requests, I believe, added up to 305,000, and then there was a 45,000 general building fund request. Am I remembering the numbers correctly?
That's I'm just going back to that tab here.
And I'm bringing that up just because in some prior meeting long ago, there was a different set of numbers tossed around, and I'm just trying to make sure that what I just said is the correct version.
Okay, I gotta go to the revised tab here.
The numbers haven't changed.
Okay.
Right. From the last time, 65 for the roof, 35 for HVAC, 75 for the transfer station, 130 for the dry hydrants, 45 for the general building capital, which does tie to what you just said, 305 in specific projects, and 45 in general contingency.
Okay. And just to connect that, this isn't for capital budget, but to connect that back to our free cash discussion, just trying to understand if the free cash, assuming that that's what the decision is, or the recommendation is, that free cash would be used for that 45K to cover the general building fund, because that would presumably be not necessarily bondable. Heidi, you're nodding, so I've got that. Just trying to make sure all the pieces are lined up. Because
Yes,
before there'd been a different number than the 45K that I think had been tossed around for the free cash contribution.
right. I think we're recommending 200,000 to borrow and 150 from free cash, of which the 45 will be part of that. And we'll identify, I think, 2 of those projects for bond council to be specific borrowed amount.
Got it. Okay, so I think I now understand. I think I now see where my misunderstanding was. Okay, so the free cash number is 150, some of which will cover that 45, the rest of which will cover some of the specific projects.
Correct.
Got it. And that's, yeah, Sean said none of the numbers changed, so that all makes perfect sense. Okay, thank you for clearing up my small confusion on that. That's very helpful. And okay, so that's great. Anybody else with anything to report? Let's see. So I think I have just a couple quick things which were kind of embedded in that email dump I sent around this afternoon. One, I won't go through the details, but the school operating budget request went up about 41,000 from what we had looked at previously, given a state recalculation of minimum local contributions. And then I'll also just mention, as I did in that email, I respun that 5-year ahead budget projection model. And because of assorted changes that have been made as we've been getting closer to the public hearing and town meeting, and some reductions in projected spending for FY24, looks a lot less likely that we're going to bump into the override thing next year. It could still happen, just a projection. The numbers can move around in many, many ways, but looking less likely than what things looked like on the numbers we were looking at in early January. So just wanted to, since I know there are a number of people on the call who maybe didn't receive that email, just wanted to put that out there and make sure everybody heard that. Natalie, go ahead, please.
I'm not a liaison to the planning board, but I did go to their meeting yesterday. Because as a private citizen, they seem to want to change the Odessa Carvana law, special permit to let the car trucks come down Western. I'm not exactly sure why, but it was a whole. I went to that meeting yesterday. And we were trying to figure out, and they voted to delay it for 2 years to take any action. But that was.
Yeah, okay, thanks, Natalie. So I think that isn't an item with budget implications, so not.
No, it is not. It is not.
Not mainline for advisory. Chris, do you want to take like 30 seconds or a minute to just say something about that, or would you prefer to just let that, again, we don't need to talk about that tonight, but if you want to take a minute.
Well, there was a lot of concern, and I'm going to make it super quick because it's not on the agenda. There were a lot of concerns from one select board member and our DPW director about the effects of traffic on within the town, but also how it's rerouting traffic through South Framingham. Within the special permit, there are traffic mitigation funds, which I have discussed many times. The town does not have access to it. We would like access to it to see if we can solve some of the problems and maybe be nicer to some of our other neighbors, cut down on some traffic coming down through the center of town that's getting rerouted, but also being much kinder to Natick and Framingham. Gino, do you want to add anything to that?
The only thing I'd like to add is, as I mentioned last night, the abutting neighborhoods in Framingham are environmental justice communities. And so that really makes it, I think, kind of a sad commentary on Sherborn to be sending the diesel trucks through environmental justice. It's actually like 8 or 9 environmental justice neighborhoods.
Okay.
So be it.
And Gino, I'm just going to add this one quick, because I didn't want to.
Yeah, and then I want to wrap this up.
Oh, I'm sorry, Dan. I'm sorry.
No, one quick thing. Then I want to wrap it up because we're stretching. I think we're stretching the bounds of liaison reports.
Nope. We already made the vote, so I was just trying to answer the question.
Yeah. Okay. No. Perfect. Thanks. I appreciate that, and thanks, Gino. Carol, if you had more on this, I'd prefer that we not get deeply into this because it's really not a topic for us tonight, and we're probably, as I said, stretching the bounds of what counts as a liaison report.
Yeah, that's fine. There were a lot of Western Avenue residents and abutters who were in favor of keeping it in place, and we appreciated that planning board voted to keep that restriction in place. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Anybody with so thanks. I think it's helpful for everybody to hear about that and know what was going on. I heard a number of reports about the meeting last night, and I'm sure other people in this meeting appreciated getting a little flavor of what that was about. Anybody with any other liaison reports to talk about before we get going on main agenda? Okay, so let's move forward. Debt, budget, and related issues. Heidi, I think that's floor's yours. If you want me to share something, I'm happy to. Just let me know what would be helpful.
Sure. If you would bring up the debt budget request, it shows the last 3 years, the columns.
Yep, give me just 1 second here.
Yeah. For a quick reference, for FY '24, the request is going up about 70,000. There was a big jump from FY '22 to FY '23, and that is in part due to we had a long-term bond issued and interest and principal got added. So you do see a significant jump between the FY '22 actuals and then the FY '23 budget request we had to cover this new long-term bond. Going into FY '24, I do not have another long-term bond coming in for this plan in the next year. It'll probably be FY '25. So it's really going to be short-term interest that's added and some principal to pay down on a DPW pickup truck. We have a separate ban out for that because we haven't gotten the truck yet. We're hoping to roll that over. So the bottom number is 1878384. If anyone has any questions? Okay, silence is good. So I think the next chart, I don't know if you wanted to bring that up, Dan, if you had any comments on showing, kind of looking a quick glimpse of where we're going with some of the debt of what currently we're looking at this year's capital ask and looking at what was in the 5-year plan. All I had was last year's budget model to kind of work off from capital planning. We're just getting the new one going, so it'll tweak a little bit. There's also a question about the library. How much impact will be long-term bonding on that? That still is not solidified. So this is just some estimates to show you the impact of debt. I don't know if you have that one to bring up, Dan.
Yeah, give me just 1 second here. Didn't have that one stashed quite as conveniently, so just take an extra second to get there. And that should get it up.
Right, so the gray is our existing long-term bonds, and you can kind of see where peaks and valleys have come up. When we've long-term bonded, there's been a jump. And then the light blue is what we've already committed to in capital from last year and kind of the effect how that just rises a little bit. And the dark blue is what we're looking at if we're putting in what's in the 5-year plan. So it's just kind of a good benchmark to keep. We're putting on more than we're rolling off right now. For a percentage of the budget, we're really not in bad shape, but there was an impact. So if anyone has questions too, I'm happy to answer them.
Anybody?
Okay.
All right, good. Thank you, Heidi. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, so then we'll start working through warrant articles in numerical order. We're going to start with Article 17, which is allowing lower speed limits. Sean, Chief Galvin, not sure who wanted to do that. And not sure if there's anything you wanted me to share.
Good evening. What, do you have anything to share?
I could just share the warrant article if that would be helpful.
Sure.
Okay.
I'm going to share this picture behind me.
Yeah, I saw you. This is all very strategic, the way you selected that backdrop here.
It was. I'm sorry I can't crop it and slide it off, but I had to go all the way to Lexington to find that. And it's a shame. My intent is we'll have those all over town, at least at all the town borders. Just for context, while you're trying to share, Chapter 90, Section 17C allow that. What we're asking for is the town to adopt Section 17C and B, which we need to do in order for the select board to be able to establish any zones within town to fit into this category. There's several different areas of town where we could and most likely will choose to do that, but the most important one would be downtown. And I'd like to just talk about that. I don't think there's much opposition to the fact that we should probably have a 25-mile-an-hour zone through downtown. Anyone that would argue that doesn't do much walking around or crossing those crosswalks downtown. The speed limit right now through downtown starting at about Butler Street, through the lights, through the split, and up Washington or South Main is 30 miles an hour. The traffic is often doing more than that. There's no reason to be going that fast through downtown, because you're almost always going to stop at the split or the lights. So it's not deemed that it's going to have any effect on the backup of traffic that's caused by the light or by the train. But it's going to help increase the safety in downtown. There's certainly some neighborhoods that right now are just defaulted at 30, that I don't think many people that live in those neighborhoods think it should be 30. A few that come to mind are Cider Hill, the Oldfield neighborhood, the Ivy neighborhood. There's no reason to have a 30-mile-an-hour speed limit in those neighborhoods. That's most of all I have to say. We envisioned that shortly after we would do this, we would then have to circle back with the state and ask them to lift the statutory limit through town. Right now it is 30, and that was a statutory limit. So we would have to go back, ask our local engineer with Mass DOT to lift that. And I don't think anyone argues that they would do that and allow us to enact the 25-mile-an-hour zone.
Sean, when this if this is adopted, are there any limits on where the speed limit can be 25, and what are the limits on the select, assuming that all this gets done and DOT says it's all good, what's the scope of where the select board could do this? Can they do it anywhere, or are there restrictions?
Well, they can't do it everywhere. The restrictions, and they were much more onerous 10 or 15 years ago. But now it's kind of loosely stated at houses at about 200 feet between houses for more than a quarter mile. I'm trying to read it while I'm talking. And then obviously buildings that are meant for a business. So there is places in town where you couldn't do it, and obviously any places in town where there's already a regulatory limit, the select board can't just deem that and override the regulatory limit. But we can ask to have that rescinded, and of course we would do that in downtown. There may be some others. There's only a few places in town where you don't have houses every 200 feet. The far end of Farm Road, Forest Street, some others. Most other places you could do it, but you wouldn't necessarily do it. We're not going to be looking for 25 miles an hour on most of South Main, most of North Main. That wouldn't fly.
Tom, anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I was just going to say one benefit to this. There is a process in the state now to set special speed regulations on any of our roadways. It's quite an in-depth process, and I will tell you from personal experience, you never are able to set a speed limit at what you would hope. It's generally higher. It's based on the 85th percentile of the speed at which vehicles are traveling. With the acceptance of this section of the law, it does allow some control for the community and for the select board in setting our speed limits. And the nice part about it is it could be set townwide for all the defined thickly settled districts, or it can be done on a street-by-street basis. Even today, the town of Westford, I think their meeting last night, their select board picked out 3 specific roads and sections of roads where they imposed this limit. They had accepted this legislation last year. So it's going to be a great tool for the town. It doesn't immediately change anything once this is voted on and accepted after town meeting, but it gives the board a tool to work with the community to establish some reasonable speed limits.
All right, thanks. Natalie, you had your hand up. Did you want to get in with a question? Or is your hand up from before?
Western Avenue?
Go ahead, Natalie. Start again.
Does this apply to Western Avenue, Sean?
What's that?
Does this apply to Western Avenue?
No,
Of course not. Okay.
it's highly unlikely any part of Western Ave would go to 25 miles an hour.
Any other advisory members with questions, comments, reactions? Strikes me as just a win, because it just gives the select board a little more flexibility to think about what speed limits should be in different areas, and that flexibility seems like it'd be a very useful thing. All right, Sean, Tom, thank you. You made it really easy. Great.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay. At this rate, we're going to be done by 7:45.
Don't say it. You just cursed it.
Well, I picked 7:45 because everybody would know that wasn't it wasn't a serious thought. Okay, so next one is Article 18. This one might take a little longer to talk about than the last one. This is the what on the agenda says solar bylaw. So this is about the ground-mounted solar. Chris, Gino, I don't know who wanted to cover this, but the floor is yours. Take it away.
I'm gonna let Gino take it.
All right.
Or at least
Okay, I just
start it.
have a couple of quick slides.
Sure, that's great.
Okay. All right, I didn't know the article number when I put this together. So the background is in 1985, the state legislature established the right to solar access in legislation. And in 2011, Sherborn adopted current large-scale solar bylaw, which created a overlay district that consists solely of the closed landfill area, landfill/transfer station, and it was prohibited elsewhere. Last June, there was a Supreme Judicial Court decision that decided that solar facilities are a protected use under the Dover Amendment. So towns have limited ability to regulate, not no ability, but limited. So in response to that, the planning board reviewed that decision, sought guidance from town council, reviewed bylaws from other towns and attorney general rulings on them, and then put together a comprehensive article, which is based partly on a model produced by the Cape Cod Commission. The basic structure of the bylaw is that it creates a much larger overlay district, which consists of the power lines, which would be where they would be allowed by right, subject to site plan review. And that's the same overlay district, one of the same as one of the wireless communications overlay districts. It also would provide for facilities elsewhere in town, but only by special permit, in which a maximum of 50% of the parcel could be utilized for solar facilities. And there would be a setback of at least 100 feet, 200 feet where a residence abutted the site. And it establishes a review process with strong performance standards, including ongoing monitoring and maintenance. So in conclusion, the current bylaw does not meet the trace of lane standard, which makes us vulnerable to proposed facilities. The trace of lane decision made very clear, it was tied very closely to the state's climate change goals. And that was a large basis of that decision. And so this bylaw it's certainly not perfect. Nobody thinks it's perfect, but the attempt is to strike a balance between enough town control while still meeting the parameters of the trace of lane decision. And that's it.
Okay, I'm gonna add one thing. Gino, when you say it's not perfect, have we seen a perfect bylaw yet?
Never.
Okay.
All right. Chris, anything you wanted to add?
No, basically, as this was not written to prevent a project, nor was it written to promote a project. So I've had people asking me, well, if we do this and this, maybe Maple Street will work. And I've had just as many people say, well, I think you should write it this way and it'll help prevent it. This has nothing to do with that, number one. Number two, there are going to be projects that we're going to have to deal with. The tough part with this is A, it has to pass town meeting. The Attorney General's office has to basically approve of it. And then it has to give us enough protection in case of a lawsuit. So the bar for this is very, very high. So this is not some bylaw that the planning board wants to do. This is something we have to do, and we have to get it done this year because, again, projects are going to, I don't think a lot of projects, but there are projects that we're going to be facing with, and this will give us a level of protection. Again, this has been a very, very frustrating series of meetings with this bylaw. The baloney that I've had to hear from all, it's been very interesting. I've also had a lot of very wonderful input, and I'm going to be working with a couple of folks, and we're going to see if we can fine tune this. But a lot of it has to also do with what town council says, and we're still looking at a lot of bylaws that the Attorney General's office said, no, you got to pull this out. Yes, you can do that. And so, you know, almost daily, I'm looking at how the Attorney General has ruled on other bylaws, because a lot of towns are in our same situation. Again, I don't want to drag this out through the summer. I don't want to do a fall town meeting for this thing. We'd like to get it done. Again, you know, there's going to be a lot of howling about this. But we're doing the best we can. So.
Yes. Thanks, Gino. Thanks, Chris.
Yep.
And I've seen just enough of this process to know what an incredible amount of work it's been to get this done. And so, you know, thanks for pushing to see this through. As you said, not something that it sounds like the planning board wanted to do, but something that the planning board had to do, you know, the best that they could on this. So let's see. So I have one kind of question, which is, are there any limits on what can be done under power lines, either because Eversource would just say, you know, we need access to our power lines, can't have solar equipment underneath it, or any other limitation that somebody would throw up and that suddenly would be a fly in the ointment on this? Or what's the state of play on that?
Well, there's going to be a lot of limitations, but regarding the overlay district, I'll have Gino answer that question.
Well, just like any other permitted use in a zoning district, the zoning is only one aspect of it. And, you know, most of the land under the power lines is privately owned,
right?
Not by Eversource. So landowners would have to be involved.
Yeah.
And then Eversource's requirements for maintenance and access and such would have to be addressed. So, you know, those are certainly hurdles, but.
Okay. But as you understand it, your best sense is that the Attorney General is likely to look at this and say, yeah, the overlay district makes sense. This is a reasonable way to go. I mean, who can know for sure, but that's, as you said, you're trying to thread that needle, and that's your best sense.
Yep. And other towns have had things, and they've had to come back and modify their bylaw. Again, all this stuff is a work in progress. I think an overlay district is an important part of it. I also think having it by special permit in other areas of town, but again, that gives us a little bit more control.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Okay. Chris, you know, there's some comments popping up in the chat. So just as we pick up other questions, you may want to just glance at that as well. So I'm going to start with advisory members and give folks on advisory a chance to weigh in and comment first, and then we'll pick up comments from others. So Steve, if you want to start.
Sure. I probably have like a few different questions, so if you'll bear with me. One, first of all, this is a zoning bylaw, right? So does this require a 2/3 vote?
Yes.
Okay, so that's just kind of to keep in mind the bar, as you said, it's high, but also even just needing a 2/3 vote makes it a pretty high bar. Um, to be clear, because I've, attended some of your previous meetings on this, and I think there's a lot of confusion among the public, but that this bylaw is not, as you noted, it is not actually specifying any specific projects. This is just zoning, and all you're doing is allowing these large-scale ground-mounted solar projects to happen by right, but at the discretion of the landowners. So I just want to underscore, right?
Correct,
Go
by
ahead.
right in the overlay district.
In the overlay district, right? So I think there are a lot of people who are under the impression that we are approving a very large-scale solar project that runs this entire 4-mile course, and that is not the case. And I think there are also some people who are concerned that the town is somehow forcing a landowner to put solar on their own property, which is also false, right?
Correct. We can't be responsible for misinformation, but you're correct.
Right. So I just wanted to make that clear and
Thank you.
make sure that it was stated in this meeting, and I'll probably state it again at the public hearing, that this is not the town forcing a private owner to have large scale solar on their property.
Absolutely not.
I guess I have some questions. The language of the bylaw that you've written, because I think you basically just created this from scratch, right? When I say from scratch, I mean it did not exist as a town bylaw. You basically said, we're throwing out the old one and here's the new one. Now, my question is, how much of this language is sort of like boilerplate, like you took it from other towns, and then how much of it was actually sort of crafted by you uniquely?
It was a combination of both, actually.
So would you say it's like 80% of it was kind of taken from other sources and 20% was you wrote, or kind of what's the approximate breakdown?
I would say it's about 80-20. Would you say that, Gino?
Yes, 75, 80 in that range, definitely.
Okay. And then that 80%, you're reasonably confident that that is all stuff that's going to pass legal muster at least with the Attorney General. I'm assuming that you took it from bylaws that have been written in response to the Tracer Lane situation, right?
Correct, yes.
So then I guess my question comes down to like your choice of the overlay district in terms of, the type of land that you've chosen, obviously under the power lines, but also sort of the size of it in relation to the overall town area. Like in terms of percentage of the town overall, approximately what percentage of the town is covered by this overlay?
It's not very much, but it's a significant increase in what we already have, and that's really what the state's looking for.
Okay.
So,
yeah, I guess where I'm going with that is, sorry,
Stephen, for context, if what you're referring to is the Tracer Lane decision that said Waltham only allowed 2% of its land area to be used for large scale solar, but they didn't allow it anywhere else. It's smaller than 2%, but we also allow it by special permit elsewhere. So it's a significant increase in availability.
I see. So the fact that it's allowable under special permit, that essentially expands the area. I mean, I guess theoretically it expands the area of potentially allowing it to the entire town.
Yes, it also allows us to be more restrictive with our special permit because we have the overlay.
I see. So can you go into more detail about that in terms of are there specifics that we know from the Attorney General or from court decisions in terms of if you have an overlay, then that allows you to be more restrictive? Like how do we know that kind of detail? Because that's one of my questions would be, well, can we just eliminate the overlay and just say, all right, well, fine, we can do it all over town, but it just always has to be a special permit.
Okay, the problem with that, in my view, is let's say somebody presents us with a project that the town is very much opposed to. And we say no, and they can test it, and it's the first project that's been presented to us. They're going to say, well, you say it's by special permit. We think what they're asking for is reasonable. You've made no other attempts to provide for anything by right. It's going to be much more difficult to defend that position.
Have there
wanna
been
keep it-
any?
I'm sorry, I want to keep the town out of court.
Yeah. So have there been any other cases since Tracer Lane where this situation has been put to the test? You know,
No,
where,
not this identical situation.
okay. So really this is your conjecture that the overlay allows for a more tighter special permit restriction. It's not like there was a case, you know, 3 months ago where this came up and
These situations have all come up really hard in the last year. So,
okay. Right. I think that's it for now. If I come up with anything else, I'll ask it later, but
Okay,
you can move on, Dan.
thanks, Steve. Anybody else on advisory? Jane, go ahead.
So did I hear that there are other towns that have used the power lines as the overlay district and that seems to pass muster? Did I hear that earlier?
I did not say that. Gino?
No, I didn't say that either.
Okay, all right. So, well, first of all, just general question. Has council reviewed the text of this, the full text of the current bylaw that's before us?
Gino?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, they have.
Okay, and I'm not asking for, if there was legal advice given, I'm not asking for what it was, but if we do this, I think I also heard that there was, this is private land. It's not owned by Eversource. It's privately owned land in the overlay district. Did I understand that correctly?
Yes,
Okay, so essentially this creates a potential economic benefit for the owners of that private land. And others in town will have to go through some kind of special permit process if they want to do the same thing. So without, if we do have advice on this, I'm not asking what it is, but I'm just wondering whether we have discussed with council whether we may have any difficulties around that situation. In other words, some people in town now get an economic benefit potentially, because by right they can do this on their land, and others don't have that right.
Jane, if anyone presents us with a project that's good for the town, in other words, I don't want to pick winners and losers. That's why some people said, well, why don't you pick an area here and pick an area here? To try to get that through would be a disaster. Anything town council advises us, I'm going to implement, because once, I might not agree with it, but once I've asked town council their opinion, I kind of have to take it. So yes, we are working actively with town council.
And I would just suggest that specifically be a topic that be sort of, discussed with them or considered with them.
Yep. And just to add, on the 18th at your next meeting, there's an all-day planning conference in Worcester, and I'll be attending it with Frank. And one of the classes is really on this topic. So I'm bringing the bylaw, and I'm going to talk to other people, and they'll probably have attorneys there, and we'll just see how other towns are managing it. So.
Thank you.
Anybody else on advisory? So I'll jump in just with two things. One, Chris, given what you just said on process, are you thinking that it sounds like what you're thinking is the words we're looking at tonight aren't necessarily the final words, because there's still bits of adjusting and tweaking.
I've been working on it all day, so yes, no, it's
lucky you. What are you anticipating as a timeline for when there'd be, relative to public hearing, relative to town meeting? What's the timeline you're envisioning for when the text would be finalized?
I really want to get it buttoned down by the 21st of this month.
So at the public hearing, you would be looking for not not approval of specific text, but more of a, in general, here's what advisory thinks about the idea, it sounds like.
Yeah, I mean, even tonight, I mean, obviously, Dan, you guys can ask anything you want and I'll do my best to answer it, and Gina will do his best. It's more the approach and why we're doing it. The actual details, I mean, if you're curious, I'm happy to talk about them.
Yeah.
I mean, there are some people that are very interested in the wetland component of it.
Yeah,
There's people
yeah.
that are very interested in pollinators.
Yeah.
I mean, again, that's
Yeah.
really not for tonight's
Yeah,
discussion.
I
unless
get that.
Somebody
I get
really
that.
wants to talk about it.
Yeah, okay. I'm guessing Steve has a comment on the process issue. Steve, if you want to go ahead on that, and then I have another question for Chris and Gino.
Yeah, it is about the process because, you know, once the warrant is finalized, obviously you can't change the language and it'll have to be an amendment at town meeting. It makes it a little bit challenging for advisory to make a reasonable recommendation on the article at the public hearing if we already know that it's not the final language. I'm just kind of like putting that out there for you, right?
Stephen, the changes will not be significant.
Okay. Still though, I think even if you are proposing, you know, changing an or to an and, you know, it's like that change is going to have to happen on the floor of town meeting probably. You know, unless it's something minor enough that that advisory could reasonably amend it in our motion. But if it's like, this paragraph got rewritten slightly, like really, it's going to have to be one of those situations where you provide a whole bunch of people with a printout of the new language compared to the old language at the town meeting, and then you're going to have to submit that to the moderator and to the town clerk and all that jazz. You know,
I'm very aware of that, but I can't see having all the answers we need prior to the 18th. And then we still have an open hearing. We still have to button things down at our meeting on the 21st. I was hoping to have it done last night. Things got kind of thrown off the rails with the Western Ave stuff. So we did not complete last night.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. That's just kind of a bear in mind thing.
Yep.
I did have another question that I wanted to loop back on, if that's okay, Dan.
Yeah, that's okay. Go ahead. I'll come in after you.
Yeah, you know, part of it is due to so Brad Corralius and Carol McGarry have both made comments in the chat, essentially both kind of suggesting that Eversource would not be real keen on there being solar panels under their power lines. I'm wondering, are there other municipalities in the state where they have something like this, where an overlay is under power lines, and is that a situation that has passed muster with the Attorney General?
I don't know. I will find out. Gino might be able to answer better than me. Again, we're not planning on having things built here and here and here. We're just providing the zoning, and things may change in a year, 2 years, 5 years.
Yeah. I mean, my concern would just be that if we know ahead of time, if we have, you know, reasonable information that says Eversource would not really allow large solar arrays under their power lines, I'm just wondering whether the Attorney General or a judge in a lawsuit would say, yeah, this overlay district is actually a bunch of BS because you know full well that Eversource would never allow you to put any solar panels under their lines.
If I found that out legitimately, Stephen, then I would act differently on the bylaw, guaranteed.
Okay.
Thanks, Steve. You just you pretty much stole my question. So no, I was having exactly the same thought. So Chris, Gino, I mean that question has popped up a lot. So I think if there is any further information along those lines,
yeah. Well,
I've heard it. Just kind of swirling around in the air. I've heard that from a bunch of people.
Well, there's a number of people that really want to kill the overlay.
I understand that.
And so, you know, all kinds of excuses are going to be made.
Yeah.
And if they want to be on planning board and they want to do this thing, I'm happy to let them do it entirely. But I'm not going to accept something that I then will have to legally defend if I think it's putting us in a weaker position.
Yeah, completely understood. And as you said, if you had, legitimate information, if you had information along those lines that was confirmed, you'd go in a different direction. If that were to pop up in the next week or two, I think people would be really, really interested.
Believe me, Dan, I want to do the best thing for the town. I'm not going to do anything that's going to make us look stupid or put us in a weak position. At the same time, we got to get this thing done. So
Along those lines, I was going to offer a view, and then we'll get to Wasim and Jane. I was going to offer a view that, to me, it seemed to me that you and the planning board have worked a pretty thoughtful threading of the needle here with not what anybody wanted, but what the town has to do, balancing some strong considerations on both sides that people have around solar. And so, when I read through this, my reaction was, boy, this seemed like a pretty thoughtful balancing of what we have to do and what we can do and how do we maintain some control. So just one thought there from one member of advisory.
Thank you, Dan. And one of the reasons why I really wanted to have the overlay where we chose it is because if somebody wants to cut down 50 acres of trees, we'd like to minimize that threat, and it may happen. But if we can minimize that threat, because there's going to be a lot of howling if that happens, that. At the same time, we have to put something together that meets all, again, there's like I said earlier, it's a high bar that we have to reach.
Right. Okay, thanks. So let me pick up Wasim, Jane, and then we'll open it up for people other than advisory members. Wasim, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I was just gonna try to maybe offer an answer for the power line. I know that power line companies usually spend a lot of money on tree management, so I'm just throwing out there an assumption. It's not based on anything, but it's just an assumption that having some sort of solar panels under power lines, and that eliminates the need for Eversource or whoever to manage trees, which is significant cost for them, is probably not a negative thing. So I don't know. I was just going to throw that thought out there.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Wasim. Jane, go ahead, please.
Jane, you're muted.
Sorry. Just maybe another thing related to all this Eversource discussion to discuss with town council, if we haven't already, might be whether there could potentially be any liability to the town if, in the course of establishing or maintaining these solar panels, if they get placed, some damage is done to Eversource's property, whether that could potentially result in any liability for the town. It might just be something to explore.
I will write that down and I'll ask town council.
And then I assume that there isn't any, scientific evidence that there is innately something that could damage the power lines if the solar panels are there. But that's, probably something to think about as well. I mean, I assume the panels are collecting the heat and they're not, dispersing it in any way, but I could see that, if there was a heat buildup there, that could potentially cause an issue. So just to check whether there's any known scientific evidence that kind of a placement could damage.
I don't think so, because I've had a conversation with the gentleman that's doing the Maple Street project, and he already talked to me about something that he was considering under the power lines. And again, I don't want to change the conversation into that, but an offline conversation, we could talk about it if advisory is interested.
All right, thanks. Okay, so let's all right, Steve, you want to get in one last word, and then let's open it up to outside.
Yeah, I'm just kind of stepping in as sort of vice chair and prefacing any sort of general public comments that if I'm just going to assume that Carol and Brad are going to have thoughtful comments about why the current overlay district as proposed is problematic, I would just ask that you also provide us with your suggestions for what to do instead of the overlay, whether you think that simply having it as a special permit throughout town without any by right is if that is the proposal that you are in favor of, knowing that the planning board believes that actually probably makes the town more vulnerable because we'll have less to stand on in denying any special permits. But basically, what would your alternate proposal be, either for a different overlay district or the scenario where there is no overlay district?
Okay,
Thanks.
thanks, Steve. That's a good setup. So Carol, thank you for being so patient. The floor is yours.
Sure, no problem. Thank you. I sent a letter to planning board on February 15th, which is really when I first heard about this. And it was really just to inform them and inform the town about the ecological value of those lands. And actually, hang on one second. I'm so sorry.
No problem.
I think one of the things about the power line is, you know, many of us have walked under the power lines and we walk on that gravel road and we kind of see this scruffy looking landscape maybe and think that it's not very valuable land or it's degraded land. But in fact, that's really not true. And since I've had some experience with that, having, you know, been in the certificate program at Native Plant Trust, and also even because of my contact with utilities in my role as Conservation Commission member, I wanted to alert people. So fundamentally, and by the way, I'm speaking as a resident, not as a Concom member. My concerns with this is that actually the land under power lines are stable plant and animal communities. They've been maintained as shrub habitat for utilities for decades. That's actually a habitat that's disappearing in the state. And so there are all sorts of species there that are unusual. And even in our own town, we've been very lucky that Ted Elman, who's a botanist and author, and he was at the Native Plant Trust, he sent me an email about this, and he said Barber's Powerline Corridor spans both wet and dry habitats and is the most botanically rich and diverse place I know of in Sherborn. I found a large population of the watch-listed rough-leafed aster and many other uncommon native plants, including sundew, woodland orchid, nodding ladies' tresses, Canada lily, New England aster, Virginia meadow beauty, bog goldenrod, Canada frostweed, birdfoot violet, and on and on. I bring groups from Native Plant Trust for botanical studies there because it's really a special place, a remarkably diverse plant community. So I wanted to share that with everybody because I think there is this kind of feeling of like nothing could be worse than cutting down woodland. And I would not like to see woodland cut down either, but I also don't want people to assume that the utility lines are not important habitat. They are really actually super important habitat from a scientific perspective. And you know, I don't know how much I only did my own quick research. I'm no expert on zoning bylaws, but I did go back and look at the DOER model zoning bylaw, and they specifically say that they strongly discourage locations for solar facilities that result in significant loss of land and natural resources. Mass Audubon says the same thing. And in the case of Mass Audubon, they said you should include consideration of the value of open lands for grassland and shrubland dependent wildlife, which perfectly describes the land under the utility lines, many of which are in decline in Massachusetts and are of high conservation concern. So that was kind of where I started, and I'm, you know, everybody on planning obviously knows that I sent this, and Chris is well aware of it. Since then, following, you know, what we've been talking about, as you can see, and as I put into the notes, it just happens that MACC has an annual conference, and completely coincidentally, they had a couple of sessions, one on solar and one on the management of these utility corridors. The utilities like Eversource actually have worked really hard to maintain these corridors, to be pro-habitat. They have on their website how they have like rare species there. And the fellow who did the presentation is named Matthew Waldrop. And he's the supervisor for licensing and permitting at Eversource. I think it would be great if somebody from planning board reached out to ask the question of, yeah, would you, if these private landowners who on whose land you have power lines, if they were to want to do a solar farm with a developer, would you permit it? If you look on the Eversource website, they have very specific guidelines right on the website about what they will and will not allow in their utility rights of way. So, I think that would be great if somebody found that out and confirmed it. But I think the more important thing to me is, I kind of thought the planning board looked at that land and thought, well, this is a discrete piece of land. It's degraded habitat. This is something we can designate. And I just want to correct that. It's not in any way degraded habitat. And it does have fairly complicated ownership as well. I counted more than 20 property owners in Sherborn who own land under the power lines. I doubt that most of them have been notified. I doubt that any of them have had a chance to read or understand this bylaw or understand how it impacts them, positive or negative. I would say I do understand the feeling of urgency about this, but I think that there should be more public information about it. I think there should be more discussion. And, I think strongly that there should be more inclusion by the people who are abutters, who are going to be really impacted by this. And I don't think there's time before town meeting. So that's my comment.
Okay.
Thanks, Carol. Chris, I'll come back to you in just a second. Just a quick follow-up, Carol. Picking up on Steve's point. Do you have a thought or a sense of, if not this, what would be a preferred alternative approach?
I think that I was really interested in the questions Steve had. And I think one of his questions was basically, has this been tested yet? And if you go back and look at the court case, I think it was last April, and I think a lot of towns are scrambling around to figure out what to do. And in fact, one of the sessions at MACC was exactly about this, and was about how, well, not exactly this, but they were talking about the fact that the state is not doing a good job of protecting natural resources in the context of large scale solar. And they're kind of leaving it to the towns to figure it out. And the towns are being put in a really lousy position, basically, because the state hasn't picked this up and said, you know what, here are the guidelines, here's how we'll protect natural resources. So I guess the question, what I personally would do if I were on planning board, which I guess was Steve's question, is I would do this at special town meeting in September. I would get the best legal advice I could get on this. I would see what other towns are doing. I would see if there's any challenges to what other towns are doing, because here's the problem. Once you go for this and you establish this overlay district, it'll be very hard to reverse it. We all know that, once you do a 2/3 vote, it's very hard to go back. And I have a concern that it'll be brought to town meeting, and there are going to be people like me who are fundamentally confused or concerned, and it'll get voted down. So why not take more time to get this out to the town and build up some support and help everybody feel comfortable? Most people want solar.
Okay, thanks, Carol. Appreciate that. Okay, Chris, back to you.
May I respond? Well, number one, you're talking about Barber. Who controls the land on Barber?
Conservation Commission.
Okay, so nothing's going to happen at Barber, number one. Number two, and I don't want to get into this because I'm really sick of talking about it and I want to go have a beer. But in one,
are you buying, Chris?
Excuse me?
Are you buying on the beers? No,
I am, I will. On one side, you're saying, well, you can't do it there. And then you're saying, how could you dare recommend doing it there? So
Chris, I didn't, I clearly didn't say that. I didn't say that at all.
Carol, I let you finish.
Yes, but I didn't characterize anything you said in a negative way.
I'm just.
Carol, let's let Chris.
Let me finish,
please be polite.
As far as seeing what other towns have done, I've already spoken to town council twice. I've already read every single thing that went to the Attorney General's office. I have looked at every single bylaw that has come out in the last year and a half, and especially the one since the final Tracer Lane decision. So I don't know how much more information we're going to have unless we're waiting around for other towns. So again, there's a conference on the 18th. I'm going to see what other people say, and I'm going to see how other towns are managing this. A lot of towns will go, they'll present the bylaw. Attorney General's office will say, good, 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 this not so good. So guess what? Then we have to go back and redo something. So if that's what has to happen, I don't want to do it. I don't want to spend my summer doing this and having these conversations. I'm happy to do it if we need to. I'd rather get it done in the spring. We've got a lot of other projects to work on.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Brad, did you want to?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, please
Thank
go
you.
ahead.
I'll be quick. I'm actually going to come at this from a totally different angle, because we had spoken about this in the last Energy and Sustainability Committee meeting. While doing that, I ended up digging up a paper on solar production, on PV production under power lines. And so provided that the conclusions from this paper are true, my feeling is that this is all totally moot anyway. And the paper found through experimental study that the magnetic field produced by the power lines has a massive negative impact on the PV output. And so given that fact, if we are to believe that, then no one in their right mind would ever stick solar panels under power lines anyways, because it's not worth the investment. And so, assuming that, I don't have any issue with the overlay, just because, it'll stand, and no one who does their due diligence would ever stick, a solar array under power lines.
Okay, may I respond to that?
Yeah, go ahead, Chris. Just hang on a second, Brad. Did that get you to the end of where you wanted to, what you wanted to? And I think
that's it.
I think Natalie put a link to the paper in the chat.
Yes, she did.
That's the right paper. Yeah. Okay. So for anybody who wants to pop it up. Okay, Chris, go ahead.
I have not heard that. The advice that I gave is they would prefer not to be under power lines, because as the sun travels over the power lines, there is some shading of the panels. That's what I had heard from someone that does these for a profession. At the same time, that same person said they would be interested in doing canopies and doing like a combination of by right and special permit on Laurel Farm. So there's somebody that does this for a living, and he said, I would love to do a project down there. So again, another expert that says something totally different. And this was a one-on-one conversation that Gino and I had with this gentleman. So who do we believe?
Okay, thanks, Chris. Wasim, do you still have your hand up from before? Or did you want to? Did you have another comment to share? All right, Michael, let's go on to you. Michael, go ahead, please.
I'll briefly speak, though. I'll put on the hat of the Energy and Sustainability Committee and say that the committee did talk about this and voted support for this article, even though it had some reservations about the choice of overlay and whether there could be stronger mitigation about forested, if you can do a project in forested areas, which is something that I know that the group will work on. But I just wanted to let you know that that's where it came down. And then as an individual, I guess I still feel, as an individual, I guess I'm where, I guess I won't repeat what Stephen said and others about the fact that the overlay is that the whole issue of whether you or not you could do it in the power, it's a little bit of a legal gambit. They haven't said you can't. And it gives us some possible legal protection that we haven't found an alternative overlay district. And so it makes sense to me as an individual to pursue it this way, and a lot of it will be protected, and a lot of it, even to do a project there, will have to come under special permit, even because it'll not even stay within the overlay. So thank you.
Thanks,
If I may quickly respond.
Yep.
Michael, I had asked Michael to forward me all the emails, and that's actually what I'm looking at right here. It's in front of me, Michael. And I am going to run all your suggestions by town council and see if there's a way that we can incorporate it.
Sure. And we'll talk about it.
Yep, thank you.
Steve, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I just feel the need to chime in again with my sort of general thoughts on it. I mean, I think based on what I'm hearing, I mean, I hear, Brad, what you're saying about you know, there being some research saying that solar under a power line isn't great, but in my mind, it's sort of like the point of the overlay district isn't to figure out where is the ideal place to put solar panels in town. The point is to have an overlay district to show the state that, hey, look at us, we're promoting solar somewhere in town, just like you wanted us to. And the idea is that we are picking sort of the area that is, I don't know, least unpalatable to 2/3 of the population, right? Because if it's not there, then where, that's the nature of my question is that if not there, then where else in town? I'm not sure that I agree with Carol's kind of suggestion of why don't we wait until the fall and do a special town meeting? Because I think as Chris said, it's like, well, what are we waiting for? It's not like they haven't done their due diligence, that there is some gold nugget of information that they're going to dig up in July that they haven't dug up. So we're just going to be having this exact same debate in the fall instead of right now. You know, I don't think that I've heard anybody suggest a better alternative to the overlay district that the planning board has drawn up. And in some ways, it's kind of an advantage that there's lots of different owners of this land, and that maybe it isn't great for Eversource, because that probably makes it more challenging to have a gigantic solar farm in some place in town. You know, like there's not going to be a 30-acre parcel that gets clear cut and then has a huge ground mounted solar array built on it, because it's complicated to get a big project done under the power lines, but it's possible. And if the state says, yeah, it's possible, and you said this whole 4-mile stretch is fair game, great, good job, Sherborn. You know, if that is the scenario, then I'm like, I am all for this. You know, to me, the key is just kind of knowing that it would be the outcome of this proposed bylaw, is that the state says, yeah, great, good job, Sherborn, you've got this nice overlay district, and that works for us. So to me, you know, again, like Chris said at the beginning, you know, it's not perfect, but let's not let perfect be the enemy of the good, right? So I think getting something in place is better than spinning our wheels and having nothing, and then, you know, sometime in October, somebody decides to challenge the town with a gigantic solar array, and we have nothing in place, you know. So, you know, am I thrilled with this? I'm not thrilled with it, but I have no particular objection to it. So that's where I stand right now.
Okay, thanks, Steve. Anybody, Chris and Gino, here's one other just process question. So if this is approved, if this comes to town meeting in the spring, this is approved, what happens after that with how long it takes for the Attorney General to say, yeah, you're okay? What happens in the intervening period before the Attorney General does that, and just how does that play out?
Gino?
Well, I believe the Attorney General has 90 days from the time it's submitted to them, but then they also have ability to extend that time period. The bylaw would be in effect if, the date of town meeting when it's approved. However, there is that, as you point out, there is that interim period when it's kind of in limbo. And so there might be some risk, but at the same time, I think I can't imagine anyone would take that chance that the bylaw is ultimately approved by the Attorney General and make a large investment towards a project.
Yeah, of course. Okay, thanks, Tom. That's helpful. Just trying to make sure I understand the timing sequence. So anybody else on advisory who would like to know more about this has concerns, anything, since Chris and Gino have been generous with their time, and Brad and Carol have been generous with their time. Anything that anybody wants to know more of from anybody? Anybody who's already spoken who has a last word they want to get in before we wrap this one up and move on from here? All right, so let me just offer a big thank you to everyone, Brad, Carol, to both of you for coming and sharing views, Chris, Gino, for taking us through this. I understand this has been contentious. This is a hard issue. Advisory will have to do some reflection and thinking, and we'll see where it goes at the public meeting. But this, from my perspective, has just been incredibly valuable to hear this conversation and have this out for everyone at advisory to hear and get a sense of what the issues are and how people are thinking about the issue. So with that said,
thanks for the opportunity to provide input.
Yeah, Carol, thanks for coming. I appreciate it. And Brad, same. Chris and Gino, same. So thanks very much. So let's wrap this one up and let's move on to Article 19, which is Stretch Energy Code. Michael, Gino, I didn't know how you had things divided. If you want me to screen share something, if you want to screen share, however you want to proceed is great.
Michael and Brad are going to take the lead on this.
Yeah, Brad will.
Oh, terrific, Brad. Okay,
that's why I'm here.
Sorry, Brad. I didn't get you on my list of people who might be doing this, so that's great. Whatever. Yeah.
Right.
I think I have the PowerPoint. If you want me to share, that's great.
I'll share. It's easier that way for me to drive.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Okay. All righty. Everyone's seeing this all right? Looks like it.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So I'm a member of the Energy and Sustainability Committee along with Michael, our chair, and Gino, our sustainability coordinator. We're presenting tonight the warrant article regarding the opt-in specialized energy building code standard. And so I have slightly more than 10 slides, but I'm going to try to get through this fairly quickly. I thought I was going to have the most complicated topic of the night, but I may have been one-upped by the solar bylaw. So anyways, this is going to be a slight educational session too. Again, I'm going to keep it as short as possible, just because the topic of building codes is a little complicated, but we're trying to distill this down to something that's very understandable for the general public. So for some background, the feds put into effect a 2008 Global Warming Solutions Act to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and Governor Charlie Baker, in attempt to have Massachusetts play their proper role in this, signed the climate bill into effect 2 years ago in March 2021. The main kind of commitment of this act was to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. And then, in that process of hitting net zero by 2050, we're looking to kind of incrementally reduce emissions 50% of the levels, I think, of like the early 2000s or late 90s for 2030, and then 75% reduction by 2040. Okay, so building energy codes do play a significant role in this mission to achieve net zero by 2050. It's important to note that building codes primarily affect new buildings, not existing structures, unless there's substantial renovations happening. And so just to give you a sense as to the importance of building new structures to high quality standards, by 2050, it's estimated that about 27% of all building space will be represented by buildings that were built after 2023. So it's important to consider new construction given this, and of course buildings have very long lifespans. New buildings are this is really the low hanging fruit, is to improve the construction of new buildings as it relates to dropping our population emissions in Massachusetts, just because it is by far the easiest to implement these energy saving measures when during new construction compared to very expensive retrofitting of existing structures. I mean, my house was built in the 60s. It's, you know, very invasive, very complicated to try and, you know, bump up the insulation of our existing structures. And so, you know, that further highlights the importance of building new buildings to you know, high levels of quality to help offset our current structures that are, you know, so very inefficient. Bit more background on all the communities in Massachusetts and what energy codes they are subject to. By far and away, most communities are under the stretch energy code, including Sherborn. That's the light blue. The yellow is the base energy code, and the dark blue are the 4 communities that have since adopted this opt-in specialized code that we're proposing for Sherborn. So Sherborn's been a stretch building code, subject to the stretch building code since 2012, and this happened soon after we became a green community. In addition to those 4 towns that have already adopted the specialized energy code, which are Cambridge, Brookline, Somerville, and Watertown, there's over 20 other communities that are looking to adopt it. And it's probably more than that. This estimate comes from the Boston Globe from about a month ago. And this includes Wellesley too. All right, so, you know, please recall that Sherborn did pass the climate emergency declaration April 26th of last year with a vote of 96-10. And as part of that, some of the language included achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions as soon as fiscally and technologically possible, and identify and prioritize and publish a list of projects that reduce the town's greenhouse gas emissions through the adoption of more rigorous building codes, which brings us to the current presentation. All right, so the next 3 slides are going to be a little complicated. We're going to, the goal of these slides is to describe the specialized code and how it relates to the stretch code. It's really kind of an add-on to the stretch code. And I'm using 3 slides to do this, to kind of come at it from a few different angles to help to kind of crystallize this knowledge, because it is a bit complicated. We're going to, you know, hit the major points, more than just the major points. I think largely the points to take home as it relates to residential low rise, which you can essentially consider single family homes as well as multifamily. There is some additional language that we're not going to go over just because it is so very complicated, but I think with these next 3 slides, it's going to really help to kind of contextualize all of this. All right, so you have this table here where we're comparing the specialized code to the stretch code. And the specialized code does differ by whether okay, so this slide, sorry, it only applies to residential low rise, new construction. And so the specialized code, unlike the stretch code, does have different pathways to compliance by the size of the new construction home, whether it's equal to or under 4,000 square feet or over 4,000 square feet. And so I'm just discussing the 3 compliance pathways right now for the specialized code. The first one is called the zero energy pathway. And this is represented here. There's this HERS rating. It means home energy rating system. It pretty much, it's a HERS of 100 is your standard 2006 home. And so the lower the HERS rating, the less energy you're using, the better. So that's kind of the take home here, is just lower the HERS, the less energy you're using. So the zero energy pathway is if you use mixed fuel, that means, you know, natural gas, oil, what have you. But you need to have enough on-site solar panels to offset that energy usage by your, you know, natural gas or your oil. And this applies, this is a pathway that you can do for under 4,000 square feet, but it's the only pathway if you're over 4,000 square feet and you want to do mixed fuel. Okay, next one, the easiest pathway to compliance is the all-electric pathway. And for this, it is the exact same between the stretch code and the specialized code. You can see here, although, currently the stretch code that we're under, it's HERS 55 for all electric or all electric and solar, it's HERS 58. In July 1st, 2024, so about a year from now, it's going to drop down to 45, which matches the specialized code. And that's whether it's the house is under 4,000 square feet or over 4,000 square feet. So the take home message here is that with an all electric house, there's no bump up requirements of the specialized code over and above the stretch code that we're currently required to follow. And you can see, here we have the stretch code that's currently in effect, and then here's what it will be in about a little over a year. Final compliance pathway is the mixed fuel pathway. This is complicated. The ESC doesn't prefer this one just because it does get complicated. The easiest one, again, is the all electric, but it is still a pathway that you can go through. And so this is not an option if the home is over 4,000 square feet, but if it's under 4,000 square feet and you want to do mixed fuel, you have to construct the home to passive house standard. If you want to do mixed fuel and solar, then you're required to hit at least a HERS value of 42. Now, if the house is shaded, and you can see in this note down here, if it's shaded, then you can get by without solar. So there is that allowance. You just need to get that HERS rating to 42 or below. Just a few other points too, in terms of comparing the specialized code to the stretch code. For the specialized code, for the mixed fuel pathway, you are required to pre-wire for full electrification for your home. So that would mean, even though you're currently going to heat via natural gas, maybe use a natural gas fired dryer, or a range, you need all of the circuits and the wiring so that you can easily swap out to an induction range to throw in some heat pumps, things like that. For EV readiness, electric vehicles, having that charging station in your driveway, same exact thing as the stretch code, no difference. The ventilation is going to be the same as the stretch code. This just has to do with, as homes get tighter, you need to actively ventilate. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to, consume more energy, because it's pretty cool how these systems work as they extract the temperature of the exhausting air and transfer that to the incoming air. And it just makes your home really actually more healthy too, to be constantly actively bringing in fresh air. And finally, and I kind of covered this already, the mixed fuel pathway for less than 4,000 square feet requires on-site solar PV when feasible, or passive house. Those are your two kind of ways to comply with that mixed fuel pathway if you're under 4,000 square feet. All right, so now second slide to kind of hit this again, and this is going to go quicker now. And just to contextualize this, the specialized code was designed to meet the Mass 2050 greenhouse gas emissions goals. So it's really, we're trying to think forward here with encouraging adoption of this. So again, this is just another summary of the differences in how the specialized code builds on the stretch. And, for again, all electric, it's the same thing as the stretch. You could hit that HERS 45 earlier based on when you adopt, or if, it goes out to July 2024, it's the exact same thing. For mixed fuels, two pathways, HERS 42 or less, plus solar install, plus wired for full electric, or instead of the HERS 42 and solar, passive house and wired for electric. And then finally, there's the zero energy pathway, which is HERS 0, which essentially means HERS 42 or less, plus sufficient solar to offset it. Or you could do passive, a form of passive house called FIAS 0. What that really means is you're just building a passive house, and you have to get enough on-site or off-site solar to sufficiently offset your energy usage, which is actually not going to be hard because passive houses use very little energy. For new homes over 4,000 square feet, just to reiterate, you must either go with the all electric pathway or the zero energy pathway. And then as it relates to additions and alterations, exact same thing as the stretch code. All right, final slide on this stuff. Again, all electric compliance pathway is the same between the codes. The specialized code still allows for fossil fuel-based heating and appliances, but it then requires on homes less than or equal to 4,000 square feet, on-site solar PV or passive house plus all electric readiness. For homes greater than that square footage, all electric readiness and the net zero via one of two paths, which is less than or equal to HERS 42 plus sufficient on-site solar to drop to HERS 0 or the FIAS 0 standard. And then for multifamily residential, you need to build passive house if you're more than 12,000 square feet by starting July 2024. You know, it's different before July 2024, but it's really not worth discussing. It's far more complicated, and it's such a short window too that I don't want to bother with it. And I would expect that most every multifamily home is going to, you know, be around that 12,000 plus square foot mark. So just a couple slides now on multifamily passive houses. This data is a bit old. Unfortunately, we don't have data comparing passive house construction to the updated stretch code. But I think the take-home message is still helpful here. And so the Mass CEC and then an independent consulting firm, Consigli, which does a lot of building consulting work, and then the Pennsylvania Housing Finance Authority all did some studies to determine what the incremental cost increase would be to implement passive house over and above the current building standards. And it's not much. You're looking at 1 to 3%, and or sometimes less than 0% for more experienced builders. And to tack on to this, since 2019, Mass Save provides a lot of incentive to do passive house, $3,000 per unit in incentives for multifamily. And I think there's even additional incentives when it comes to the planning phases too. So for just one more slide on multifamily and passive house, there's a lot of energy savings when you relate it to the building codes at the time, or even kind of lead level building codes, where you're seeing a lot of energy savings. End use means throughout the lifespan of the building. So a significant drop in energy savings. So you very quickly offset those incremental cost increases during construction with both the Mass Save incentives and the energy savings over the life course of the building. About 30% annual energy use intensity drop under passive house for multifamilies. Here, another source found 50 to 60% in savings for annual energy use relative to the median new multifamily or same building construction, but under LEED 2008 code. So again, a lot of energy savings. And we did a expert panel last week on just building efficiency too. And we had a couple builders present. Keith Lewis, who's a passive house builder who's in town, had some really interesting insight too on the health benefits of passive house. Just anecdotal data he's collected from his clients and how, the kids are missing less school with their homes, with their new homes compared to, where they were living. And Keith had recently renovated his house, not quite to passive house standards, but implementing a lot of those concepts. And he was like, I haven't had a sinus infection since the new construction. There's just a lot of filtration that's happening with the air too. All right, so a couple more slides, just correcting some building code misconceptions. Please know that these codes do not affect pre-existing structures in any way unless there's substantial additions or renovations. All right, no one's coming in to say that you got to put more insulation in your walls. No one's coming in to take out your gas range. It's not happening. That's not the scope of these codes whatsoever. These code changes do not affect any appliances that you own. I just said that. These code changes are not new or experimental, and they do not result in unhealthy homes. In fact, quite the opposite. So just to kind of wrap it all up, final slide on the benefits of the specialized code. It's going to save you money. because of, the utility energy cost savings that are going to outweigh the additional upfront costs. And again, keep in mind, buildings have long lives, so this is important. So you do a little bit of investment up front, and it really helps you out in the long run substantially. There's energy efficiency. These energy efficiency measures reduce consumption of electricity and other fuels, and the efficient and proven passive house design, which is, a major component of this new code, has now been used in many thousands of Massachusetts projects, and it's very much performance tested. But again, you don't have to do passive house unless certain conditions are met, as we discussed. Required improvements in the specialized code are becoming standard in the building industry. And, as more towns adopt this, it forces the builders who haven't yet gotten up to speed to get up to speed. And it benefits us all, both, directly for the homeowner, as well as, those living in the immediate area and just in the world in general. The code options for all electric is really the new goal, so that these houses can become renewable energy based as the grid continues to move towards renewables. So even if you do have, you do a mixed fuel construction, at least you're wired for all electric when, that does become the standard. And one would assume, as we continue to make this transition, solar is now the cheapest form of electricity generation, that relative to other forms of fuel, this is going to be what you're going to want to do as we move forward, especially if you throw up some solar panels and you have one of these efficient houses, then you zero out your energy. You have no utility bills. For large projects, this is particularly important because of the size and their carbon footprints. So the decreasing of upfront additional costs will be balanced by the lower overall life cycle costs. And once more, this aligns with the state climate bill's net zero emissions for 2050. So that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Brad. Appreciate your going through that. So let's start. So I should just say, Michael or Gino, anything you wanted to add to Brad's presentation?
I could add a bunch of things, but I'll wait for questions. But I will say that the issue has been raised about 40B and affordable housing. And this has gone through, Wellesley is just having a few sessions tonight, even at the same time, that when I read stuff from Wellesley, Brookline, and I think it was Watertown or some others, that everybody concludes that there's no real, this transition moving on to a specialized code has no real impact on the issue about 40Bs applying and this and that, because some of the state incentives are already based on passive house, which are basically meeting the specialized code. So that nobody has found that to be an issue in terms of meeting their affordable housing quotas and whatnot. So that's just a finding from other towns that have been reviewing this issue here.
And Michael, just to make sure I understood that, that is to say that 40Bs, because of state incentives and other regulatory requirements, are likely to already be meeting the specialized code? Is that?
That's the sense I see because of the passive house issues there. I'm sure there obviously are some that could do it, but part of it is also the fact that we might want to have this kind of higher quality housing anyway, because it leads to greater affordability for the residents in the long term anyway. It makes them less vulnerable to price spikes and other kind of things. So I think it also, and in the few cases where maybe there's a push that might not be there, that we're basically going to end up with better projects for the residents as well as us in the longer term.
Yeah, Newton, I think one of our building friends had mentioned that there is a large affordable housing passive house construction project going on in Newton right now. Many hundreds of units, I believe, was my sense, over 100 units. And yeah, it just seems like with all the incentives that it kind of promotes this pathway of this building standard anyway when it comes to affordable housing within Massachusetts, giving the incentives.
Thanks. Steve, go ahead.
Yeah, I had a few things, but I'll just kind of piggyback on that, the 40B thing, because one of my questions, I just want to clarify, would new 40B projects be subject to the specialized code, or as a local restriction, would they be able to bypass that?
They cannot bypass it. And just so you know that this code, when we vote on it, the way it's structured is that it wouldn't take place until January 1st of 2024. It's the way it's basically following the recommendation that is at least a sort of a 6-month period before, from when you vote on it to when you actually implement it as the state recommendation. But no, the projects will have to meet this thing.
Okay. One thing, just sort of a logistical issue, Brad, assuming that you're going to be doing the presentation at the public hearing and at the town meeting. I apologize because I don't think you were on the email where I, sent the heads up to everybody about these meetings, but you are restricted to 5 minutes for your initial presentation. Your presentation was 19 minutes. And you were actually at 5 minutes. I was keeping an eye on the clock. So when you finished up the introductory portion and you're like, all right, now we're going to start, you were at 5 minutes at that point.
Okay.
So 10 slides, 19 minutes. At that pace, you'll have time for 2, maybe 3 slides.
And
So
I'll just piggyback on that, Steve, and then right back to you. Since we want to get the public hearing done within a day, I will have to be pretty strict about. I'll have to be very strict about those time limits, or will either be there till midnight or be back the following Monday, whatever. So,
do you guys have any favorite slides then?
So I would
We
just
have some
distill it
shorter
down
ones.
to the really important things and make 3 or 4 slides.
We
Is what I would.
have some alternative slides, plus I did some very good slides at the Wellesley presentation tonight.
Yeah, you probably won't be able to walk people through the really interesting slide that had the different HERS ratings and under. It's just too much for that amount of time. Steve, but go ahead.
Sure. Let's see. My other question, because you had said this is new construction only, doesn't apply to existing structures except if there's major renovations. So is there a threshold at which you would say, all right, well, this amount of renovation or this many square feet worth of addition, now we're going to kick in the new code?
Yeah, that's clear. It's I believe it's 1,000 square feet or 50% of the living area. I'm not 100% confident in those statistics, but
I'm pretty sure that that's it. Yeah.
Okay.
And then, so does it essentially just say that all of the new construction portion of the renovation has to apply, or that you have to sort of retroactively make your entire structure now meet the new code?
It would only be the addition if it's an addition. If you're doing significant renovations throughout your home, then my understanding is it does apply to the areas that are being renovated.
I see. So if you had a sort of largish house that had oil heat, but you're like, you know what, we're gonna gut the interior, essentially the new code would basically force you to get rid of your oil heat and electrify the entire house.
I believe that is my understanding. I mean, if you're going to gut the house anyways, that's an excellent opportunity to do it. I would, my sense.
I mean,
is
we did that to our house, but it's sort of like a nice for people to know that, okay, the new code is essentially going to force you to do that.
Yeah, that's my understanding.
Well, you do have a route for the mixed fuel, so you're not precluded.
Right. Okay, I think that's all I had.
Thanks, Steve. Others, Marion, go ahead.
All right. Yeah, I'm unmuted. My question is this, for projects that have already been approved at some level in town, would these standards apply? Or is it only for projects that are first coming to the town for approval after the law is in place? What's the timing of?
Question is, does it make a difference We're not sure. I'm not sure. Maybe Brad knows, but I'm not sure. Hopefully, it's when you go to get your building permit. But I'm not sure whether it should make a difference in terms of whether we support this or not.
That's right. But,
That's
you know, it comes to mind, or comes to mind are the projects that, as you know, Michael, the comprehensive permit already been approved. We're going back and doing it again, probably. When they come back to get a new comprehensive permit, then I presume these new standards would apply. Is that the case?
I don't know. For example, the building code just changed in January. I'm not sure where the new stretch code, so who knows whether that applies to them as well. But yeah, something that somebody will have to figure out.
Jane, you had your hand up before. If
Yeah, well, first of all, just a clarification on the 40B discussion that we were having, because so these the stretch code is in the Mass Code, but is not Mass law as it applies to all jurisdictions in Massachusetts, right? It's an opt-in for towns. So if that is true, then if we were to adopt this, this would be a local set of laws, essentially. So, and my understanding was that on a 40B, the local laws could be put aside to some extent, and that the state laws would take over. So are we sure that a 40B project would be subject to this? Because I thought that, you know, the opposite was the case.
No, so we're under, we did adopt the stretch code already. We did it 10 years ago, and we are beholden to that.
Specialized.
And so if we then vote, it's a similar scenario. If we then vote to adopt the specialized code, there's no getting out of it. Like you have to follow the pathways. You have your options, but you need to adhere to it. There's no way out of that.
Yes, on a non-40B, that would be true, right? Because it's a local ordinance, it's a local regulation. But my understanding was that in a 40B project, the local regulations could be set aside, and that the state regulations would be what would apply. And the state regulations do not, because statewide, the specialized has not been adopted. I would think that a 40B project perhaps would not have to comply with these local.
I think the 40Bs we have now won't have to comply with our current stretch code, which was also an opt-in 10 years ago, is what Brad is saying. So that it's what's in place. I'll go, and I think our understanding, what we heard from another presentation, was that the 40Bs would have to apply, would have to follow the specialized code. But I'll ask you the question of, what does this make a difference in terms of supporting this warrant article or not?
And I don't know that it makes a difference to me. It may make a difference to, you know, people who have various opinions on whether, you know, they think things are a good idea or a bad idea based on what the implications would be for 40B projects. So I think that this is a question that we clearly need an answer from town council for, so that we at least understand what we're dealing with.
Sure, that'll be easy to get.
And then, you know, my sort of larger concern here is not with necessarily with the substance. I mean, I think it's a noble goal, but my concern is that what we're doing here is adopting a set of regulations that are not reproduced here. So first advisory, and then the townspeople will have to vote based on whatever's in the presentation, the 5-minute presentation that you will be able to make. They will not really understand the full implications of everything that's in those regulations, either for new development or, you know, for their own houses if they want to make major renovations and alterations. So I have a concern about that. And I also have a concern that what we are doing here would automatically also adopt any future amendments that the state may put into those specialized regulations. So that means that townspeople, if they approve this, would not only be approving what exists now, but would automatically be approving for Sherborn whatever the state might decide to put into that in the future. And that could be anything. You're basically voting for something that you don't even know what it could be. So, you know, I have some real process concerns here in terms of, first of all, people truly understanding what it is that they might be voting for, And then, what are the implications if that specialized code changes? We've automatically adopted it then, and we don't even know, what could go into that if we were to pass this.
Okay, thanks.
That's
Thanks.
the same, that's the same with the current stretch code, like that just came into effect. That whatever level we're at, we're always vulnerable. Whether you call it vulnerable or we're brought along with what the state adopts for a building code or an energy code. And just as what happened in January, when we signed up for the stretch along with the other 300 towns, that went into effect automatically. So that, and essentially over time, the stretch code will probably move towards the specialized anyway. This is essentially this is the kind of building code that we need, that the state needs to keep doing just to address its climate action goals.
And
So there's not going to be anything dramatically that something totally out of the ordinary is going to come along under the specialized versus even just coexisting under the stretch code.
And what Michael's saying applies to the base code too. The base code, which every community in Massachusetts must at least follow, still gets updated, still gets more stringent over time.
And the issue of a building code being complicated is, right, it's always an issue. That's just what happened in January. Most of the changes in the building code came in January without us really knowing anything about it, really, except for people who were following it. The specialized code adds some little bits to it, but the vast majority of changes in the energy code came in January under the energy code, the stretch energy code that was updated. And so we're always left with that kind of evolving regulatory process. And so that the changes that we're talking about adopting here a little bit sooner in some cases, in most cases, it's probably all sooner than what things are, but it's necessary given the kind of climate goals that everybody is trying to reach for. And it will make overall lower cost houses, I think, and healthier houses. I mean, the issues are in general on the building code in this process. This code went through setting this up went through a year or more of hearings where you have a lot of different parties, and clearly you have the building, you have climate activists who want to push for more or other environmental issues that be the priority, and you have builders who want to try to keep things simpler and simpler and not want to do it. And this is a compromise. Even the specialized code is not a tremendous, it's an important improvement on the regular stretch, but that was still a compromise with builders. When you look at the public hearing processes that went on and the way people still felt like, wow, didn't go far enough. Energy efficiency is clearly the most critical thing we can all do to save money and to deal with the climate and deal with our resource burden and footprint on the earth. And this one at least goes further. A lot of people felt like it should have gone much further than even the specialized code. But I think, as Brad said, this is low-hanging fruit for us to begin to get to. If we think of what it's going to take for us to get to even cutting emissions by 2030 by 50%, that's quite a task that the state and as well as somewhat internationally accepted. And so this is a fairly easy and lower cost way to help us get along on that path. Sorry to get on a milk crate or whatever you want to call it.
Wasim, want to go ahead, please?
Yeah, thanks. And so really nice presentation. I really enjoyed the presentation, but I know 19 minutes, how you're going to be able to do that in the town meeting, but the way you explained everything really made sense. So thank you for the presentation. So I really want to echo Jane's question and I think Steve's question about 40B, because that to me is one really major question. Most developers, I'm just making a guess here, but if I was a developer, I'm probably used to doing whatever most communities force me to do. So maybe it'll be, I think, what the stretch goal. If I'm a developer, maybe I'm used to doing the stretch goal. Now if a town is calling for specialized, this is something, a development or whatever, I'm not necessarily used to. Maybe 40B is an easier path. So I'm really curious to get confirmation about whether a 40B process can go around this specialized goal and just pursue the statewide, whatever statewide is. Because I think that will have an impact for sure. So developers, if it's going to increase their cost in any way, that will have an impact.
Right. I'm fairly sure that they can't get around it, but we will absolutely confirm that. But I see your point, but I think that it's not going to be an issue because I don't think they can get around it there. And it's also, and what even the specialized does with the passive house for the larger buildings is something that has been, as we've said, has been going on. Builders are somewhat familiar with that route anyway, and for 40Bs, because it's not just a matter of passive house getting lots of incentives. They actually, when they get ranked for financial aid, financing for these things, there are points that the state gives for having a passive house design, so that it's had an incentive to go that route on several levels, not just incentives for doing the design and getting money back, but just how you actually get through some of the regulatory process and some financing options. But we will confirm that absolutely, because obviously I see your point that whether it would drive people to doing that, but I think that's something we will easily clarify and get back to you as soon as possible.
Michael, if you get get clarification on that, if you want to just let me know, I can then share it with everyone on advisory. That'd be great. Thanks. Brad, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just sharing a supplementary slide that we had at the tail end of our deck too. Just to we didn't expect to cover it, but this just details the stretch code for multifamilies, and it's going to get quite stringent anyways. So this is happening. I mean, you can see, what's coming into effect in July for multifamilies is going to be passive house or TEDI, which is a very complicated rating system, or you have to hit these HERS goals based on, if you're full electric or mixed fuel with solar or not solar. And then, in July 2024, under the stretch, it gets, more stringent. Again, you can do passive house, or again, there's that TEDI, which I don't fully understand. And then there's, HERS is dropping down to 42 or 45. My sense is that that's all electric, or it's going to be mixed fuel. So, it's getting quite stringent anyways. And the benefit of the passive house is that it's just so well tested at this point, rather than kind of flying by the seat of your pants, these developers flying by the seat of their pants and trying to hit these new HERS ratings, which does have some checkpoints, but not nearly as much as the passive house. I mean, there's a lot of design that goes into it. And, like Michael said, there's a lot of funding from the state too. So it honestly just, when the developers really kind of crunch the numbers, it just makes more sense to go passive house anyways, which is going to be required under the specialized code starting July of next year for, over 12,000 square feet.
And as you could see, I mean, we'll find it clarifying, but as you could see here, even the specialized code is going to be the same as the stretch code through until July of 2024. And then it has somewhat of it specifies one pathway, but that pathway is probably still going to end up being the least cost one anyway, even with the stretch options. But whatever, we'll clarify that issue and let you know.
Okay, thanks. Marion, go ahead.
Yeah, everything you said brings me back to wanting to know details about the process. I totally support this bylaw. I will lobby for it. I'll push for it. I'll vote for it, not questioning that. But we, as you know, have a large 40B project that's on hold. And it's in the process perhaps of changing developers. We're trying to get a new developer in place for it. And it's a negotiation, it's a sales pitch. And I remember, Michael, you discussing with the previous developer, putting solar on the roofs, and they said, oh, well, you know, that's a big expense, probably not going to do it. If there's a way we can get them to do it, that's great. But on the other hand, we want to kind of know how to manage this. So I should probably talk to you offline about this. I have a second point, though. I'm wondering whether the specialized code can be modified by improvements to it that we in the town may see. For example, there was a point brought up at the Open Space Committee last night by a potential new member who's sort of an expert in these things as well. And he suggested that the town would do well to require of completely new housing, that is housing that's still in the early planning stages, to require that the orientation of the buildings be such that they be positioned so that solar panels on their roofs would be most efficient. And I wonder if that has been considered as part of the specialized code, or if that's something that could be added by a town.
It's actually in there, Marion. Thank you for bringing that up.
Okay.
There's language in the Code of Regulations about rooftops being PV ready. In terms of during construction orienting the roofs in such a way, I'll have to reread. But under some of these pathways, the roof construction does making it PV ready is a component to compliance.
Right, a positioning of the building such that it takes advantage of the direction of solar is another thing that's different.
They'll be incentivized to do that, sort of trying to meet that. Plus, as I just confirmed with Gino, the building code is a state setup that we cannot tweak.
Right, okay.
But we might be able to build it into some sort of zoning process or other kind of thing there, but it's not something that we can change.
Could I ask a quick question regarding our ongoing project that we're dealing with? Is it are there actual state financial incentives for adopting this specialized code that a developer could take advantage of that are better than what it would have before in a 40B development?
Yeah, passive house incentives, $3,000 per unit. I have a slide on this actually.
There's a whole bunch of incentives. I don't think the incentives have changed since they were developed a year or so ago. So that's a separate activity there where they give you money to do the energy modeling up front. I'm sort of going through this because this is what I was trying to push the Coolidge Crossing people to do a year or so ago. They almost did it, or they started doing some of it, but they give money for doing this energy modeling stuff up front, and then you can get money just for going through the process of trying to design it that way. And then you also can get some funding if you actually then go through. So it even covers your cost to explore the passive house process.
So with a new developer, we can perhaps sell that over again.
Sure. No, I'm willing to try to do it again. Did it then. They were going to hire somebody else instead to do it a slightly different way, but they were doing that. And then if you'd actually get through the whole process, then there's some significant credits, as you see here.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Marion. Anybody else on advisory? So I guess one question I had was just undoubtedly when other towns, the handful of other towns that have adopted the specialized code, or the towns that are thinking about it, undoubtedly the hard cases have come up where somebody, homeowner, developer, has been unhappy with how this has played out. Have any feedback, any experience that you could share from what you've heard from other towns? Has adopting this code caused any frustration? Has it all been pretty smooth and easy? Has it not been long enough for us to know, or anything you've heard or could share on that side of it?
So there is at least a 6-month waiting period before implementation. So any issues, I guess, would just be administrative at this point.
So it's just too soon to know.
Yeah, I think so.
Right, and since most of the things are, it's just applying the same technologies or whatever else, the main issue and the same design things, the main issue is whether people fight that it's basically got some more upfront costs.
Right.
And whether the fact of it's that classic issue of what might be trying to cut your upfront costs, even though the building is well lower cost on life cycle basis,
Right.
easily lower cost over time. And so that's the challenge that we always face in a lot of this process of making sure that people get the best product on a life cycle basis and not just suit the developers in the front issues. But yeah, so that's the only, and most of the votes haven't been, I guess we witnessed the Brookline vote. I mean, they did a lot of work there and a lot of discussion there, but in the end, the vote was quite close to unanimous there. They have a kind of representative town meeting. So that's the only thing that I could say there. And
okay, I was thinking both about the point, Michael, that you just made very well with upfront costs versus life cycle costs, and whether there was pushback on the, say on a typical Sherborn home, 1 to 3%, somewhere $10,000 to $30,000, something like that. If there was pushback on that, and the other piece I was wondering about is on the renovations or additions, whether this had been a pain point for people or not particularly. But it sounds like it's just too soon to know.
And
not enough
the
experience.
numbers are much smaller than what you just threw out there in your own.
So I was just picking up on the 1 to 3%. And
Yes, but if you think of the actual house, yeah, I guess.
I'm putting, the
$1 million.
average assessed value in Sherborn's like, I don't know, 900,000-ish.
No, I'm just, a lot of that's land value. When you just
okay, that's fair. That's fair. Sure,
housing cost itself
good point.
and before profits and everything else.
Yeah, good point. That's a fair point.
That's all
Thanks.
I wanted to say.
I was doing the math in my head a little too fast.
Right, economist to economist, you got to get.
No, good point.
And it's interesting too, because with the typical Sherborn home, it's going to be kind of more luxury skewed. And, just in discussion with our energy efficient builders, they're like, well, the more, luxury the home is, the less the incremental cost is, just because, proportionally,
of course.
You're buying all this expensive, fixtures and tile and all that, then, a little extra insulation's not going to over and above the stretch code is not going to make a difference. And in regards to the additions and renovations, please keep in mind, there is no difference between the specialized code and the stretch code there. It's following the stretch code, and we are already subject to the stretch code. So if you're worried about additions and renovations as it relates to this initiative, don't be. It has no bearing.
Okay, so for additions and renovations, any pain points are going to be exactly the same, whether the town adopts this or not, because that seems like a point that will be worth making sure everyone understands.
Thank you for that. That's helpful.
Yeah, we got.
I think, Brad, if you want to focus on your 5 minutes, I would probably focus on what is the difference above and beyond what the town is already doing now between the stretch and the specialized,
Okay.
Because I think that's going to be a lot of what people have a question about is, well, how is this different from what we're already doing?
And people are going to be imagining their own scenarios going forward and thinking, you know, is this going to create an additional pain point for me? And I think, you know, speaking to that would be, I think, will be helpful.
Right.
Yeah, this has been a great kind of, you know, test run of this. I appreciate all the feedback.
Yeah, we have to clarify the fact that, right, what you consider pain of an upfront cost, how you basically say that, but your utility bills are going to be a lot lower when you're now paying 30.
Yeah, of course.
And how do we do that, and how we factor in the fact that this also makes a difference in climate action?
Michael, you just have to persuade people to, you know, use an appropriate discount rate for doing the, you know, doing the math there.
Almost any discount rate will probably work with this.
Yeah. Yeah. So anybody else who wanted to, I mean, this is our chance with Brad and Michael and Gino here to dig in as deep as anybody wants to dig to understand the you know, ins and outs here.
Yeah, and the price cost, I guess I would want to add that, go on with Brad's thing of the fact that, right, that the high cost housing in Sherborn, those 1 to 3% kind of, or 1 or 2% upfront cost increases really are based on more average kind of housing. And that it really does come out less when you do the sort of high-end housing.
Yeah, probably more dollars, but smaller fraction. Yeah.
But okay, sorry to interrupt your question.
No. I think, yeah, I think the answer to my question is it's just too soon to know how this has played in other towns because it's just happened too recently. Right. Anybody else before we move on to the next set of articles?
So just a quick question. I keep on hearing that the ongoing cost is going to be lower. Is that a function of having the solar panels there to offset electrical? Because electrical is not going to be cheaper than fossil fuel or mixed fuel housing. So how is the ongoing cost going to be lower?
It's through the efficiency. I mean, it's, again, you know, there's a mixed fuel pathway for the specialized code. And so you're just building to a higher efficiency standard just with the building envelope. And so that alone is going to reduce your costs. But, you know, in terms of, you know, as a side point, comparing, you know, fossil fuels to electricity, I mean, I would argue, you know, are we comparing natural gas to electricity, or are we comparing oil to electricity? Because, you know, with some of these high efficiency heat pumps off electric, you know, they're going to outcompete oil, but not natural gas. The only way to outcompete natural gas is you add, you know, a solar array.
And I'll add to your question, right? Electricity, a lot of the pushing us towards electrifying homes is pushing us towards electricity that is quite expensive now, particularly. Hopefully a war somewhere might end at some point. But that part of even with the new code, that for new construction, that you're putting in, the house is much more efficient and you're using heat pumps that are essentially many times more efficient in their use of electricity. And so for some, putting in heat pumps, the bill does go up, as probably you've experienced. But that's something that is part of the stretch code to some extent now anyway. And so that the increment of the specialized code is you're getting a little bit, the house is a little bit tighter, and therefore you should even get more efficient use of your heating systems and other things. That's where the sort of logic of that, the specialized code does sort of pay for itself. But yes, there is some issue of with the electrification in the short run that has to go on even with this.
Okay, I got it. So essentially the insulation part, yes. So that there is maybe insulation for the specialized code. There's insulation better than the stretch code insulation. Is that part of it as well?
Yes, especially, and it's not just insulation. It's really an important part of the tightness of your house. part of half of your issue, and even with Mass Save Energy Audit, which I'll make a plug for, if none of you have done a Mass Save Energy Audit in the last 2 years, please go sign up through the program that we have to go get the Mass Save Energy Audit one way or another. Plus, you could do it every 2 years. But yes, even a critical part of the program now is that they do air sealing. It's not just putting fiber, it's not just putting cellulose in your attic now. They actually clear around there and they try to do sealing around the edges and every other place, so that what's an important part of Passive House and some of the new designs is that that the building envelope itself is much tighter in terms of air, in terms of any airflows, which are critical. They're as important as the level of insulation.
Got it. Thank you.
Thanks, Wasim. I guess another angle on my question from before, is there any concern that somebody who's thinking of building a house in kind of a Metro West community would look at the specialized code in Sherborn and stretch code in a neighboring community that perhaps hasn't yet adopted this and say, Sherborn's just going to be more expensive, more regs, more hoops to jump through. I'm gonna build in this other town instead of Sherborn. I mean, has that been a part of the conversation around this, or not so much?
Not really. I guess I'd be surprised if that scenario did play out, just because, there isn't the specialized code. It's not that much more than the stretch code that's going to hit in July of 2024. I mean, there's pre-wiring, but if you go the all-electric pathway, it's the exact same thing. It just, it'll hit a little bit earlier if we adopt it, a town meeting, given the 6-month, rollout.
Yeah.
And I would think that there's enough developers around that that's not going to affect that, whether we really will have people doing these houses. It's not, we're not going to see a lot sitting there just because we have the specialized code. And
I'm just trying to think of all the objections.
I appreciate the angle.
Okay. So I think that's it for me, unless somebody else has a comment or other questions. Okay, so Michael, Brad, Gino, thank you very much for going through this so carefully, and good luck on the magic of the 19-5 transfer. I know you can do it, and you'll get it. You'll get it there.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay,
everyone.
very good. Thanks very much. Okay, so let's go on to the remaining warrant articles. That would be 2021, 22, 23. And Jackie, the floor is yours, however you want to handle the discussion.
Okay, thank you. One thing I do want to clarify, because there were some questions about the Attorney General. So just briefly, I am the one that's responsible for sending the Attorney General packet in, and I have 30 days to do that after town meeting, but my plan is to get it done within a week. I've already started some of the pre-work. So I just wanted to let you know. So then once they receive it from me, it's 90 days.
Great.
Okay, so I just wanted to let you know, I have 30 days, but I'm not planning on taking that long.
Helpful, thanks.
Okay, so I don't know if you guys had a chance to look at Schedule A and B, which actually goes to 22 and 23.
I can share those if you would like. I sent them around this afternoon, but I'm guessing most people haven't had time to look at them.
And I'm not sure that it's really necessary for everybody to look at it, but in case, even if you just looked at one page, because each one is 13 pages, but that's basically the housekeeping. So it basically on there, for example, it says, amend the change for a semicolon following property, to a comma. So those are the kind of housekeeping issues that it's going to be: correcting spelling errors, putting a period after a sentence, capitalizing, a word that's supposed to be capitalized. Those are the housekeeping issues for both the zoning and the general bylaws. So it's pretty straightforward.
We'll ask for it.
Sorry. Oh. And I will have,
Plus, I'll ask the person who owns it
Michael,
about.
Michael, yeah, thanks.
I will have, examples of that available at town meeting in case anybody wants to see it or they don't understand, but it's basically, it's just simple grammar. And spelling errors and things like that. So I've never shared the screen before, so I'm going to try. I just wanted you guys to be able to see what article, what 20 and 21 are about the restyling of the bylaws and what the code's going to look like once it's published. So I'm going to attempt to do this, and I apologize if I mess it up because I've never done this before. Okay. I'm getting a really strange message here. Okay, maybe it's not going to let me.
So Jackie, the usual routine would be have the file open.
It is, the file is open.
And then after it's open, then hit the share screen button, and it should give you a screen that lets you choose what file you want to share, and then choose the file that it's not behaving that way for you.
No, it's not.
If you want to very quickly email it to me, I could share it as well.
I don't think you'll be able to because the code's not done yet. It's password.
Okay.
Like
Okay.
It's password driven. I'm the only one that can get in.
Okay.
That's unfortunate. So, well, basically, see, yeah. I'm looking at it now, but I guess I can't get it to work.
Open on your screen. There should be a green share screen button down near the bottom.
Yeah, I did do that.
And what does it show you then?
It says desktop and then phone, iPad, iPlay, Google Chrome, unknown.
And it doesn't show an option for the file that you had open on your desktop.
No,
You should be okay with desktop then if that's open on your desktop. If that's what
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, if there is anything else on your desktop you need that isn't, people shouldn't be seeing, nor a suggestion's a good one. Try sharing the desktop.
No. Yeah, see, this is really weird. No, it's not letting me do it. Contacts.
Does it give you an error when you click on, like, when I bring my share screen up, it says desktop 1. So if you just click on
it says desktop 1. That's what it says, and it's got
and if
like
you click on that, what does it give you an error?
It says open system preference and security and privacy to grant access.
Oh, so it sounds like you have some security settings on your computer that are limiting what you can share.
I apologize.
Could you just sort of describe
so
kinds of changes?
Can you take a screenshot of it, Jackie? If you take a screenshot?
I can try.
Can you take a picture with your cell phone and send that to Dan?
Okay, yeah, that's a good idea. Thank you. I will do that. Okay.
Crowdsourcing. This is great.
I know. Sorry, I thought this was going to be quick. All right. Okay, so let's see. I'll just click on something. All right. Dan, should I text it to you, or what's the best way?
Texting is fine. Email's fine too. Whatever's easiest for you.
Okay, it doesn't matter. All right.
Okay, just got that. So now.
Oh, you did? It went through?
I'm not. I got a text from you, but I'm.
Oh, you did?
No, I didn't. No, I didn't. No, I didn't. I'm sorry. I didn't.
Okay, all right. Code. All right. Space. All right, I just emailed it.
Okay, so let me go check out email and see if I can.
I can also text it too if you'd prefer.
Email should be good. Give me just a second to
Okay.
get there.
So anyway, while he's pulling that up, so basically what the code is doing per the bylaw, the way it's mentioned is that everything's going to be numerical now. So for instance, the zoning is now going to be, I believe it's 240, and it'll be 240-1, 240-2, and people would be able to go onto the website, go to the code, and then search. So you'll be able to, so here I have town meetings. So if you clicked on any of those 70-1 date for town meeting, it would pull up another subsection and it would say all these different things, again, the rules. So this is basically what all of it's going to be like. So you could go into the enter search term and you could put dogs in there, you could put advisory, you could put fencing and put conservation, and it would pull up all the different bylaws or language that refers to that information. And then you could drill down to that as you needed to. So then basically general code, after the Attorney General approves all the new bylaws and zoning bylaws, and I get the approval back, general code will upload all of that to the website and make the corrections. And if a Mass General law gets repealed, we actually had some Mass General laws in our current bylaws that were repealed quite a while ago. And that's part of the correction that's going to be in the housekeeping. But our bylaws will now constantly, hopefully, be up to date with whatever the state statutes are, and spelling corrections and everything will be up to date. So that's basically what the code project is.
Sounds like this both creates a standardized mechanism for updating everything and also makes it all searchable with hyperlinks all throughout to get quickly from one spot to another.
Yes, so it'll make things easier for committees, for residents to look up, to look for information on there, and also, again, know that it's every year it's up to date. We won't be behind anymore with Mass General laws that were repealed like 10 years ago, which is actually what happened on one of the bylaws that we didn't know about. So that's basically the situation. I'll make sure that I can show more during the hearing, and I know I'll be last, so you guys will be ready for me to go very quickly. So that's it.
Okay. And on the hearing, it will be on Zoom, so it'll be the same. It'll be, the same setup.
Right.
If you want to send files,
I'll just make sure at least that I can share my screen.
yeah. And if you have any concerns, you can also send me files ahead of
Okay.
time.
All right. Thank you.
Well, thanks. So anybody have questions or comments, reactions for Jackie on these last 4 articles? Okay. Looks great to me. Seems like a really nice thing to do. And I think we've all at one time or another slogged through bylaws and all to find something. And this just seems like it will be a great improvement and make that so much easier.
I think so.
All
Hopefully.
right. Okay. Thanks, Jackie.
Thank you.
All right. I'll take this down. All right. So the last, so we should do minutes. So I think we're at the end of warrant articles, unless somebody has another item related to warrant articles that we should be talking about. And let's do minutes, and then we can just talk briefly about the public hearing and plans for that. So Wasim got minutes for us. Give me a second to share those. And let's just take a read through and see if there's anything we need to change. Sorry about that. It's like there's a little bit of I will fix I can tweak the fonts to get the fonts to all match their jumping sizes. I presume I can do that after we approve these and nobody will object to that. Anybody, please just jump in if you see anything we need to adjust.
On Article 13, it says we adopted the state statutes. It's probably statutes.
Thank you.
But if there's statues that need a home, we could adopt them.
And we have a lot of good venues to place them too. So while we're reading the last bits, let me it's interesting. Oh, we're switching from Arial to Calibri, so let me just make this Calibri so it all matches. All right. All right. Anybody see anything else that we should change? Big thanks to Wasim. These are long minutes. You know, it was a long meeting. Really appreciate your doing these and getting them pulled together. I would happily entertain a motion to approve minutes as amended on screen.
So moved.
And second, great.
Second.
Okay, Steve.
Aye.
Mike.
Aye.
Jane.
Aye.
Nora.
Aye.
Peter.
Aye.
Natalie. Natalie, you were muted. Couldn't hear you. Still can't hear you. Wasim, let's come back to Natalie. Wasim?
Aye.
I'm aye as well. Natalie, can you, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
And you're good with the minutes?
Yes.
Great, thank you. Not sure why we couldn't hear you. That's great. Okay. So we're good on minutes, 8-0. So the last thing is just to talk about our next meeting, which is the public hearing. Public hearing will start, it's all on Zoom. Public hearing set to start on 8:30 on Saturday, March 18th. I set the agenda that got posted to have the advisory meeting starting at 8. I'm not sure we'll need that, but if anything comes up so that if there's anything we need to meet about or discuss prior to the public hearing, there's a time slot to do it, and it's posted so that we can meet then. The continuation date, if we need a continuation date, which I'm very much hoping we will not, is Monday night at 7. And that meeting's posted too as an if needed meeting. So just, so everybody knows, I'm hoping that with the number of warrant articles we have, that we'll get through everything in a reasonable length of time and we'll not need to use that, but it's available if we do.
In the store, so.
Sorry, was that
Never
comment?
mind.
Okay. In terms of plan for the hearing, I'm thinking I will at the outset do a little bit of stage setting on budget and kind of where we are and so on. Probably have a couple charts to share. I will probably mostly put that together this weekend, and sometime midweek I'll send that around so everybody on advisory can see it. And if I'm doing anything, I think it's going to be very much just kind of the consensus view. But if I'm saying anything that anybody objects to, obviously that can get changed before we actually get to the public hearing. But just to set the stage a little bit, and it gives me a chance to kind of do some of that thinking before writing up a draft for the writing up a first draft for the advisory report for all of us to look at. I'm thinking I will do when we get to the omnibus budget, some explaining about the school's budget, ambulance. We talked about this at a prior meeting, town building operating budget, and IT. Maybe the IT should be a hold. Maybe it will just be something that that I explain at the top. I'll check in with Klaus and figure out on that. The other items on which we last talked about holds were Council on Aging, Board of Health, possibly Select Board. Just wanted to see if there is still sentiment that those are the right ones, if there are any others, or if maybe those aren't. So I think I'm on board with thinking we should have a hold on the Board of Health. Anybody on COA, just to make sure that if I do that, there's somebody who is inclined to go there on COA?
I think it's probably worth holding the COA. I mean, I think that they've done some work to sort of justify their ask, and they've done a cost analysis and whatnot. So I think it's worth giving them a few minutes of a platform to present that.
Okay.
I think I think that there is probably a lot of controversy in town as well. I don't know if there's a lot, but there's some controversy in town as to whether it is worthwhile to increase the funding for the COA, and I think it's worth letting them defend their position.
Sounds good. And as you said, they have done some analysis that they can share. Select Board, anybody inclined to pursue that and put a hold on that one?
I'm leaning against.
Yeah, that's kind of where I am as well, but I wanted to make sure to give everybody a chance, just since I kind of need to think through the choreography of how we're going to do this and anticipate. At least I would prefer to anticipate so that people whose budgets are going to be held would kind of know that, and they're kind of prepared for that. Just following what I take the Steve Tsai dictum to be for public hearings, as few surprises or no surprises if possible. So that's why I just wanted to kind of check in. Okay, all right.
I'll just say it then. I admit that I don't have a lot of storage in my memory. So I think the COA, if I recall, the reason we're discussing it is because there's been a couple of positions, right? Part-time increase. So I guess what I'm trying to say is maybe right now I forgot all the context of why there would be a hold on. I know you probably have it all in your mind, but I don't. So that's, you know, the lack of my response is probably just because I'm not remembering the context more so than, you know. Having said that, it's not like I'm going to have a surprise, but I'm just mentioning this. That's all.
Yeah. So, you know, if obviously, if anybody, you know, I mean, at the public hearing, any of us can call a hold on anything. So this is in no way meant to constrain that. It's just trying to do a little bit of as much as possible planning ahead of time. If somebody during the week has a thought of, hey, I really think we need to, you know, zero in on this and have a conversation at the public hearing, you know, again, that can just come up at the public hearing, but I'd certainly appreciate knowing, because again, I think that can just help with making sure that other people who might be speaking about that can kind of anticipate that and be ready for that. Okay, so that was kind of I mean, I'm going to refine this. I'll spend some time this weekend kind of getting this trying to get more specific about a roadmap for the hearing. But that was kind of my starting point, big picture thoughts on how to put things together. Anybody with any other thoughts on that? Different directions, different things that we should do? And Steve, I'm hoping you and I can maybe this weekend connect.
Yeah, we can talk about the sort of logistics. One thing is, and either someone can volunteer right now, or you can just ping people later, but you should have somebody who is a timer for people's presentations.
Oh, yeah. So it's go ahead.
And also I'd like to have a sort of somewhat unobtrusive way for the timer to indicate to you that someone's time is up. And what I've done in the past is I've said, during discussions, advisory just has sort of free use of the mic. You don't need to raise hand. If you're advisory, you don't need to raise your hand to start talking about something. You can just do it. Whereas all non-advisory members need to have a hand raised and then recognized. And then essentially the person who was the designated timer on advisory would raise their hand when someone's time was up. You know, so if, let's say, you know, Peter was the timer, when someone's 5 minutes was up, then Peter would just put his raise hand up. And then when you saw Peter's hand raised, you knew not that Peter wanted to say something, but that someone's time was up.
Yep. Okay. Well, that sounds like a good system.
So either someone can volunteer now, or you can
anybody
volunteer someone later.
Yeah. It'll be hard for me to manage the conversation and do the timekeeping. We could also split it up morning and afternoon if you know, somebody would prefer to do it for just part of the time. Steve did find someone who's going to take minutes for us, so that is great, because that's a big burden.
So I can do a shift of the timing.
Okay.
If someone else would take another shift, that'll be great. If not, I guess maybe I spoke too quickly.
Well, I think we can find somebody else to do. Another half. Jane, it sounded, you're muted, but it sounded like you were.
Yeah, I'll help Bossy.
All right. That's great. Okay.
Thank you, Jane.
And we can talk about this, you know, maybe the morning before, just to go over rules, but basically it's the proponents get 5 minutes, and then anybody from the public speaking gets 2 minutes. And there's the time limit, and then it's my job to keep things moving if people start repeating things that other people have already said. Okay, great. Steve, any other things that on that score that we should talk about tonight while everybody's here?
Not that I can think of it. You
Okay.
just reminded me of the fact that we have a half an hour before the actual hearing, so we can hash out a lot of this stuff the morning of. So
yeah, so I mean, my guess is there won't be any official business we need to do, but probably we'll want to get on, you know, a bit, maybe not at 8, but certainly 8:15 or something, get on a bit early just to review the kind of procedures for the day, so we're all on the same page. Okay. I think then we are good for tonight. So, you know, we didn't get done at 7:45, only missed by a couple hours. So, you know, it wasn't a bad prediction, all things considered. So I would happily entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move to adjourn.
Thank you, Natalie.
Second.
Okay, and quick roll call. Natalie,
I
Nora,
Aye.
Peter,
Aye.
Jane,
Aye.
Mike,
Aye.
Steve,
Aye.
Wasim,
Aye.
and I'm I as well. So that gets us to 8-0 on that score. Very good. Thanks very much, everybody. See you in a week and a half.
Have a good night.
Thank you.
Good night.
Bye-bye.